Well, Happy New Year. And I understand that most of us have learned to start a new year with some trepidation lately after the difficult starts we've had to the last few New Years. And obviously, Omicron has given this new year a pretty inauspicious start as well. But it's not only New Year, it's also Epiphany. And so I will be encouraging you today to lift your eyes up from the despair that's all around us, like those wise people who follow Jesus. Lift your eyes up and follow a star. And speaking of that, let me ask you, what do dreams, biblical prophecy, astrology, and angels all have in common? It's not something I found in a Christmas cracker. It's probably even less funny because the answer is that they all lead us to Jesus. Angels led the shepherds to Jesus. A dream led Joseph to stay married to Mary so that they could raise Jesus together. Biblical prophecy led people to expect the Messiah to be born in Bethlehem. And astrologers. Well, astrologers, that's what these wise men were, these wise people. Astrologers looking to the stars to predict major human events were led to Jesus by one of those stars. Which makes me think about Sesame Street. Do you remember watching Sesame Street as a child, or maybe with your own children? If you do, you probably have this song in your head somewhere, and you won't thank me for now reminding you of it, and you might have trouble getting it back out of your head again. One of these things is not like the others. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the others? Before I finish my song, well, dreams, angels, biblical prophecy, astrology. One of these things just doesn't belong. And yet, there it is. God likes to do that to us. Dreams, angels, and prophecy feature all over the place in the scriptures as ways that God communicates with people. They are God's ordinary forms of communication, but astrology, that is regularly condemned. For example, Jeremiah 10 says, Jeremiah 10 says, "Do not learn the way of the nations, or be dismayed at the signs in the heavens, for the nations are dismayed at them, for the customs of the people are false." Yet, here in Matthew, these false customs lead people from those foreign nations right up to the door of Jesus' house. These astrologers placed one foot in front of another on a path they believed to be the path of truth. And though that path was disapproved of in Scripture, that path led them to Jesus anyway. And at the same time, many who considered themselves to be God's chosen and obedient people failed to recognize Jesus when he was right there in front of them. That's interesting, isn't it? And maybe even a little bit disturbing because it calls into question some of the rigid boundaries that we place around Jesus to try and keep him for ourselves and keep outsiders on the outside. In John's Gospel, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." And that's one of those verses that Christians like to use to keep our boundaries intact. to keep the insiders inside and the outsiders outside. And that verse does mean that direction, truth, and life are found in Jesus. But it also means that anybody who wholeheartedly searches for truth is necessarily searching for Jesus, whether they know it or not. Because Jesus is the truth. Truth-seeking is always a search for Jesus, as is way-seeking, direction-seeking, as is life-seeking. If Jesus is all those things, then seeking those things means seeking Jesus, even if the searcher doesn't know that's what they're doing. And that search for truth, for life, for direction, will usually take us to unexpected places. The astrologers looked for a king in a palace, and they found him in a poor woman's arms. But they did find him. The prophet Jeremiah wrote, "When you search for me, you will find me if you seek with all your heart." He said this to comfort Jewish people living in exile, where their usual ways of seeking God had been taken away from them. They had no access to the temple or to the priesthood or to the sacrificial system. So how were they going to seek God in a foreign land? Well, he says, God says to you, when you search for me, you will find me, if you seek with all your heart. With all your heart. Not you will find me if you look in exactly the right place and use exactly the right words and follow exactly the right rituals. You will find me if you seek with all your heart. These foreign astrologers, who presumably knew little about God's law or Jewish rituals, were people who sought the truth with all their hearts. And their feet followed their hearts, and their feet led them to Jesus. And because of them, the idea of following a star has become a metaphor for our ongoing search for God. Many of you listening and watching have been followers of Jesus for decades. And so you will know that the search for God doesn't stop at the moment of your conversion. If Jesus is really the truth, then we keep seeking the truth for our whole lives and we keep finding Jesus. If God really is love, then we keep seeking love our whole lives and we keep finding God. If God really is peace, beauty, love, joy, goodness, then we will keep seeking peace, beauty, joy, and goodness. And we will keep finding God. When we follow a star, if we choose the right star, a star that expresses God's character or a character trait that God calls forth in us, if we follow the right star, it will always lead us to God. This morning, as we enter a new year, I'm going to give each person in the congregation at St. Paul's a star with a word on the back. These words are all different and they will be given out randomly but prayerfully, prayerful that each word will find the right person. And I will encourage the congregation to reflect on their star, to take it home, sit it next to their bed or on their bathroom window, somewhere they will see it regularly. And ask themselves, consider the question regularly, what would it look like to follow that particular star with all their heart? And what might this new year that we are entering look like if we follow these better stars? 3 years ago, I was still living in Victoria, But I had come up to Brisbane at this time of year on a road trip with my daughter in order to meet Denise Ferguson and talk with her about the possibility of working together at East Redland Parish. So I was in church that day on Epiphany, incognito. And on that day, Denise did what I'm doing today, she gave out star words. And my word that day on my star was abundance. Now, as you might imagine, I was pretty pleased that this potential new parish was promising me abundance. And having moved up to Brisbane, having lived in the southern states all my life, I have just loved the abundance of plant and animal life that we have up here. It's been lovely. I have found abundance. Now, as I was leaving the service that day and I spoke to Denise at the door, we each pretended that we hadn't met each other before, but I asked her what her word was. And she said, generosity. And of course, I then said that with her generosity contributing to my abundance, we could make a good team. And I really did think we could make a good team. And that's why I accepted the invitation to move to Brisbane. But that isn't how it worked out. A week or so after I arrived, Denise let me know that she was moving to Adelaide to be consecrated as a bishop, which is a wonderful thing for Denise and an even more wonderful thing for Adelaide, but not such a wonderful thing for me, because it left me with a very different sort of abundance from the one that I had intended. I had expected an abundance of genuine teamwork. But instead, I had an abundant workload as I tried and failed to keep up with the work that was usually done by two overworked clergy. I had an abundance of difficult decisions to make that year about things that simply could not be done because there are not enough hours in the day to do all of that work. And each of those decisions led to an abundance of criticism from people in the parish who thought that I could somehow have managed to find those hours if I tried hard enough or if I cared enough. That was really not the sort of abundance that I'd been hoping for, but it is the place my search for God brought me that year. And in fact, it has helped me to see that I have a lot more resilience than I had given myself credit for. An abundance of persistence, perhaps, and maybe even an abundance of stubbornness. And I mention it mainly because I'm sure I'm not the only one whose search for God has taken them to unexpectedly difficult places. The astrologers sought for the king in a palace and found him in a poor woman's arms. Our search for Jesus will sometimes bring us to a manger, and sometimes it will bring us to a cross. But in either case, we have reached the right place because Jesus is there in either place. Jesus is there in our suffering, and Jesus is there in our new beginnings. The question is, are we still searching? Are we still following the star? Or have we settled for a destination we reached last year or 10 years ago? And of course, an even more important question is, what star are we following this year? Things like money, pleasure, and influence are fun companions for a day or two. But if we make them our guiding light, they will dash us against the rocks eventually. And if we are leaders who follow the wrong star, then we may lead others to shipwreck along with us. But if we take as our guiding light an aspect of God's character or a character trait that God calls out in us, then that star will always lead us in the right direction. It will always lead us to God. Now, if you're watching this because you can't join us at St. Paul's on Epiphany, well, if you are usually a St. Paul's member, there will be some stars left over. So if you come to church anytime in January, just ask me and I'll give you one of the stars. But if you're not a St. Paul's attender, then my suggestion is that you look up Galatians 5:22 to 23, where you'll find the fruits of the Spirit. Some of the most beautiful words you'll find in 2 verses anywhere. Choose one of those words, one that seems to resonate with you. Cut out a star from some cardboard and write that word on the star and make that your star word for the year. This is a light to guide you. You will take wrong turns and maybe get completely lost at times this year, but remember this light. Return to the light, to the star. Reset your inner GPS by it and start again. Take it home and stick it up somewhere where you'll see it, on your bathroom mirror perhaps, or your car dashboard, or inside your front door, so you'll see it every time you go out. You could follow any of these star words that I'll be giving out. If you follow them prayerfully, you will find God. Maybe in a manger, maybe on a cross, or maybe outside an empty tomb. And probably, as T.S. Eliot wrote in his beautiful Epiphany poem, Journey of the Magi, you will need to actively ignore the voices singing in your ears that this is all folly. It can look like folly to people who are following a different star. But wherever your star leads, you can be sure that the journey to God will be the hardest you have ever taken. Probably already has been. It will be hard, but it will also be the most worthwhile journey you have ever been on. And I'd like to leave you today with a prayer written by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who sadly died a few days ago, but left such an incredible legacy. So these are his words. Disturb us, O Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we dreamed too little, because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, O Lord, with the abundance of things we possess. We have lost our thirst for the water of life. When, having fallen in love with time, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of heaven to grow dim. Stir us, O Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture into wider seas, where storms show thy mastery. Where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. In the name of him who pushed back the horizons of our hopes and invited the brave to follow. Amen.